everyone. Thank you all so much for being here today. We're going to be getting started with the content shortly, but before we begin, and while folks are getting logged on, I do have a couple of housekeeping announcements. Upcoming webinars. We have one more webinar scheduled after this one for this year. On Wednesday, December 17th, we'll be having the cold hard facts of job rotation with the University of Cincinnati Education and Research Center. We'll be taking a break in January, but we will be back in February. So we look forward to seeing you for more webinars in 2026. We'd also like to invite you to check out our upcoming conference, Forever Ends Here, PFAS and Policy for Worker Health and Safety, and that will be on February 5th and 6th, 2026. The first day of the conference will be entirely online via Zoom, and the second day will be in person in Berkeley. For more about these upcoming events and to see more webinars, you can visit us online at coeh.berkeley.edu/webinars. And I'll put that link in the chat. And without further ado, on behalf of education and research centers throughout the country, it's my pleasure to present the Industrial Hygiene webinar series. This collaborative effort on behalf of each education and research center's continuing education program aspires to provide access to the current research being supported through NIOSH ERC programs. Thank you for being here today and joining us. Today's session, Industrial Hygiene on the Farm, Communicating with the Agricultural Community about PPE and Ergonomics, is presented by Anna Meyerhoff and the New York, New Jersey Education and Research Center. A few housekeeping items. You are going to be muted during this presentation. If you'd like to ask a question, I welcome you to enter it into the online Q&A box. We'll save time at the end of the presentation to address as many questions as possible. We'll also have the chat open, so feel free to use it to participate, join in the conversation, and say hi to your colleagues. This presentation is being recorded and will be made available on the Center for Occupational and Environmental Health YouTube page within 5 business days. And all participants who logged in today with their full email for the full event with their email address will receive a link via email to the evaluation form that will qualify you for a certificate of completion worth 1 continuing education contact hour. Once you've submitted your evaluation, you'll be able to access and print your certificate. And now it is my absolute pleasure to welcome our presenter for today, Anna Meyerhoff. Anna is the Senior Bilingual Agricultural Safety and Education Coordinator with NYCAMH/NEC. Anna grew up on a dairy farm, lived and studied abroad in Central America, and earned a Bachelor of Arts in Spanish from SUNY Geneseo. She has over 2 decades of experience teaching Spanish-speaking farm workers. In her work, Anna delivers trainings on pesticides, tractors, and other safety topics, and teaches first aid and CPR classes at farms. She also conducts respiratory fit testing and helps farms choose appropriate personal protective equipment. Thank you so much for being here today, Anna. We're looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you for having me. So you're going to catch on pretty quickly. I absolutely love what I do, and I'm very excited about it. So the first thing I want to talk about is just what the ag environment looks like. What are some of the hazards with regard to ergonomics and respirators or respiratory hazards? And then we're going to get into what I do, which is communicate with farmers, communicate with workers, many of whom are Spanish speaking. And I'm going to leave you with a bunch of resources at the end. So in case you do need to go to farms and communicate these issues, there's a whole bunch of things out there. Some of them I've created, some of them are from other centers who do similar things. So to start, we'll talk about some of the many, many, many respiratory hazards that exist in agriculture. And if folks would put in the chat, you're looking at a picture of a dairy farm. I'm from a dairy, but what do you see in this picture that might be a respiratory hazard, if you would? So in the chat box, if you just want to type in what your best guess, I see dust, hay, allergies. Okay, yep, hay. So cows, airflow. These barns are really well ventilated. Manure is another one we're going to talk about. Dander, all of that stuff. Some dairies are bedding with sand. Some of them use manure solids, and some are using things like shavings where there's just a lot of debris that's flying around. So thank you everyone for weighing in. I'm going to get through a bunch of hazards. Some of them are specific to dairy. Some are more fruit and vegetable and crop work. And then some of them are things that where I am in New York, we don't actually have. But since I'm guessing a lot of folks are from the West Coast, I'll talk about those too. So there's a lot of dust. There's a lot just in fields and buildings. Some barns are on the older side. There's things like hay and silo work where you have some respiratory hazards there. And then just anytime you're doing something like cleaning out a grain bin, cleaning barns that have had animals in them, whether that's poultry or dairy, there's a lot of stuff. On top of that, we get into things like foot bath chemicals. So it could be formaldehyde, it could be copper sulfate for dairy to treat the hooves of the cows. That is a respiratory hazard. So having the proper protection is key. And then things like pesticide applicators who might be out in the field doing an application of insecticides, some other things like that. We also have welding, which is one that a lot of people might be forgetting about, where ventilation and even having something like a welding respirator might be needed depending on the environment. And then someone had mentioned manure. There are several manure gases, and there have been a number of fatalities. Just last year, there were some in Colorado, and this is something where somebody goes in, they can't see the hazard, they can't smell it or sense it in the environment, and then there might be additional people who go in as well trying to help them. So it's a mix of gases. Some of them are higher up in the space, some of them settle close to the ground because they're heavier than oxygen, and you really just don't know what you're getting into. There's also silo gas, which is another one to be aware of. This is just because of the fermentation. So where I am in New York, we still do have people with upright silos. More of the larger dairies are getting into just using bunks or horizontal silos and storing their feed that way. But with nitrogen dioxide, there's this gas that smells kind of bleach-like almost. And after filling a silo, there's a period of like 2 to 3 weeks where this gas is present. And if somebody is exposed to it, they're going to end up with silo filler's disease. They can also have a little bit of a rebound where a few weeks after they think they're over it, those effects will come back. So, what does the silo filler's disease do? Coughing, burning, trouble breathing, fever, chills, headaches, nausea. The person could be throwing up. They may end up with some permanent injury to their lungs. And I know some farm workers who have had that happen. Um, there was a young guy in his 20s who was exposed to silo gas, and he's like in his 60s now. He's still working on the farm, but he had some lung issues from that exposure. So this is one where people need to be aware of the hazard. You can see it. There's that kind of orangish color that you can see in the picture, and it does have a smell, unlike the manure gases where you really can't see what you're getting into. There's also organic dust toxicity syndrome and farmer's lung. So I'm going to talk about those. They have very similar symptoms. So with ODTS, this is like a flu-like fever, feeling really run down and fatigued, having things like shortness of breath and chills, achy pain, tightness in the chest. So that's from dust and molds and things like that in hay. And then farmer's lung is an allergic reaction. Any white mold that could be on straw or hay, grain, silage, if there's that mold present, the body tends to have a pretty strong reaction to it. So if people are working this time of year where it's colder weather, moldy crops handled indoors, there's more of an exposure, and having repeated exposure over time, it can lead to permanent injury to the lungs. So farmers' lung symptoms, it's that shortness of breath, the tightness in the chest, feeling like they're having trouble breathing, and then having those kind of cold or pneumonia symptoms. Asthma. There's people who have this condition that can be triggered by certain things in the environment. So if somebody is exposed to things like dust, diesel, animals, chemicals, any of these cleaning products, pesticides that might be used in the farm environment, if they have asthma, they might be using their inhaler, having asthma attacks due to that exposure. And then outside of New York, this is mostly California and then Arizona, a little bit Nevada. This infection from spores in the soil, valley fever, can cause all sorts of symptoms. So I put up a QR code and a link to a fact sheet from California about this topic. There's information in English and Spanish. And then we have experienced this in New York, but usually you would think the West Coast more wildfire smoke and air quality issues. There have been days in the summer in New York the past couple of years where it's been extremely hazy, really terrible air quality. It looks kind of like apocalyptic, and you see the sky a color that you usually don't. But all of those exposures are really difficult for people who might be doing crop work outside in the middle of summer. So you have the heat, you have the wildfire smoke, you have any sort of lung condition or asthma, you really shouldn't be working in that environment because it's very hard on the body. And here's a link to another set of resources on wildfire smoke. So, just a few respiratory hazards in agriculture. Ergonomics. This is just how the person fits into the workplace. There's some very tall people, there's some very short people. They're doing an active job where you're doing the same thing over and over and over again. It's not always the most comfortable positioning. So you might be bent over, you might be reaching overhead repeatedly, climbing up and down a ladder, for example, with apple harvest. And there's also a lot of heavy things that need to get moved around. It might be a slippery newborn calf that you have to wrangle and get into a wheelbarrow and then move to a barn. It might be produce that needs moving. It might be the apple bag that can hold about 50 pounds of fruit. So lots of things that are very hard on the body. This is an active job. I tell workers all the time, you should consider yourself an athlete, not just because you play soccer in your free time, but because of this active job that you're doing. So how people are moving at work, what equipment or tools they're using, if they're doing things by hand, is it better to pull something, push it, pick it up and move it? There's all sorts of things that have advantages and disadvantages. One thing that I do like to recommend is for people to stretch and warm up. So some farmers are willing to do this. Workers are catching on that this really does make a difference, staying hydrated, and then just shifting body positions. So I was involved in a research project with vegetable workers, and we were looking at ergonomics. There were workers that for a time were bent over, like you saw in the picture a couple slides back, and then they'd squat down for a while, and then they'd kneel down for a while. That sort of switching up your body position and not being in one position all the time is really helpful. And then, depending on what the task is, working with both hands could help alleviate the ergonomic issues. Or if it's something like using a knife, maybe that's not going to be a good idea. So I have about 20 years of teaching things to farm workers experience, and I picked up a lot of good tips by either doing the wrong thing or kind of being around this population over and over. For workers and for farmers, the first thing, which is huge, is just building trust. So you can know what you're talking about. You can be an expert. You can have all sorts of credentials. But if they don't know who you are and you just show up and say you should do this, this, and this, it's not really going to work. Partnering with organizations, people like outreach workers, if there's clinicians who are in a relationship with a farm already, it could be a veterinarian, it could be a consultant that they work with, that could be your way in the door. So where I work, NICAM in the Northeast Center, we're not enforcing regulations, but we do training on OSHA topics and the worker protection standard. So we make that really clear up front. Hey, you know what? We're giving you this information. We're making sure you understand what the regulation says, but we're not going to like rat you out. We're not calling, we're not enforcing. We want you to trust us and ask questions and get the information you need. So sometimes the first time I go to a farm, nobody even looks at me. They're all just kind of sitting there. And then over time, having that repeated contact with a group of people, they're like, oh, it's you. And then they'll actually participate a little bit more actively. So, depending on who you're trying to get a hold of, maybe find a friend, bring someone with you, get that relationship at least started, and it is going to take time. Offering snacks is huge. String cheese is a really good one. Some research projects, if I'm interviewing people or doing a questionnaire, giving them some nice cold Gatorade out of a cooler on a hot day. Or in this picture, everybody, including the worker on the left who looks like he's not, everybody has a pair of safety glasses. So that was a giveaway, just a few dollars a pair. They're safety glasses, impact rated Z87, and they look cool. So the workers were like, oh, we got a present. If you can feed people or scheduling at a time of day where they're already well fed, but hopefully not right after lunchtime because that's hard because people might be sleepy. So thinking about when you're going to talk to this population is pretty important. Um, hmm. Another one is examples. How are you talking about an issue? You can use scientific language, but it's easier to use something everyday household items. So when I'm talking about respiratory protection, I talk about filters and I talk about sponges. So how does this cartridge work to deal with organic vapors from the pesticide application? The jelly donuts is not to remind you about snacks, it's to talk about ergonomics. I use the example of your back is like a bunch of jelly donuts and you're putting pressure on the discs. So, thinking about good posture and body positioning when you're doing something like lifting a heavy object, having it closer to the body, also considering how you're twisting and turning because you can put strain on the discs. So just using everyday household things. When I'm talking about blood pressure, I might talk about hydraulics, and people get what you're talking about right away and they're like, oh, okay. You also do need to go where the people are. So I have had the most success showing up in break rooms and sometimes in barns. The bottom right picture, we actually did a vaccination clinic right outdoors near some cows, and they were a little curious about us, but we had good open space. We were out of the sun, which is important for me, but we had everybody right there at the farm. They could walk over to where we were set up and we were giving shots. Doing things at events, going to things like fairs and festivals for the farm community. You might be able to talk to people in a low key setting like that if they have break time or if they're making the rounds and checking out different displays. That can be a good way. And then doing things like tractor operator training, we kind of partner with Extension and do things that are already being scheduled by someone else. So think about who you're trying to talk to. Not everybody speaks English, not everybody speaks Spanish, not everybody's from the United States. We have in New York lots of guest workers that are from Mexico. There's workers from Guatemala. Some of them are from very rural regions where they might have worked with cows before, and some of them have never seen such equipment as we have in agriculture. What is their background? How much schooling do they have? What kinds of work experiences have they had? What's their attitude towards safety? It might be really different than what you're expecting. And another good one to ask is just how do you prefer to get this information? Most workers, I'm in the process of interviewing for a project, they're saying, you know what? Show me, show and tell, hands-on demonstration. I'm an active learner. I don't want to read a handout. I don't want someone to talk to me. I want to actually see the process and try it for myself. You also want to think about what the materials look like because you can take an English fact sheet and have someone translate it to Spanish, but if there's too many words, it's probably not going to go too far. We have another project where we're looking at Spanish language respirator materials. So we're finding that what the workers recommended is, you know what, some of this is not useful information. You should focus on these parts, make them bigger. We have a handout where it shows the respirator that's most commonly used by these workers. We just happen to have North 7700s all over the place, and we also sell them in our protective equipment catalog. So having pictures of the respirator they use so they can look at the face piece, they can look at the valves, and everything looks exactly the same. The bottom is a set of images we had an illustrator design for us. This comic book style is really popular. Not a lot of words, images that show how to put on a respirator and adjust it, doing the seal checks. That is really successful rather than something like an infographic or bullet points or a list. Also, short videos, doing something in a video demonstration that's a few minutes long so somebody can watch it and then do that themselves. But really, the big one is hands-on. Most farmers, most workers are going to want to do hands-on learning. So you can consider the workers, but you'll also need to convince them, just like the farmer, there's a lot going on. Me personally, my job is safety. So that is what I do all the time. I'm always thinking about safety, educational materials, all of that. I don't have to milk cows anymore. I'm not on the farm every single day thinking about paying bills and doing chores. And most people are not a huge fan of paperwork and they just want like, give me two to do items or like a sentence that just says what this whole issue is. So, why do I need a respirator? What paperwork do I need to have? Just focus on that stuff. And with the workers, they're not in control of a lot about their work situation, their schedule, their supervisor communication in general, but just focusing on what they have power over, what they're in control of, will really help shift that to, hey, you can do this. But just think about why this might not be a priority for some people. It's not that everybody is terrible and they don't want to be safe. It's that there's a lot going on farms. So they really just might not be thinking about protective equipment all the time, like some of us in the safety industry. So with respirators, there's some challenges. On the left, you can see, we've got that respiratory hazard, that dust that's kind of coating everything on the farm sooner or later. And that's not really ideal for storing a respirator. So obviously we have the picture of it. This is not good, but what is the alternative? Is there a set of lockers? Is there a break room? Is there something set up for the worker to store that respirator? There's a lot of farms where safety glasses get left all over the place because there isn't one central location where this is where your protective equipment goes. On the right-hand side, this was wonderful. We saw this example at a greenhouse operation where they have everybody's gear all set up and ready to go. They have containers, they have their name on it, they have space to properly store it so it's not exposed to a bunch of stuff in the environment that you don't want on your respirator. Thinking about comfort is also a consideration for protective equipment. There's some issues with fit. If you are not a big, tall, white guy, you might have to try several options to find, especially N95s, but also elastomeric respirators. They're not one size fits all. I have had farms where they bought large for everybody because they hadn't done fit testing yet and they didn't really realize, hey, some of your workers might actually need a small, they might need a medium. Having something that's not going to fog up with things like goggles and eye protection. If you're in and out of barns, if you're in the milking parlor where there's iodine being splashed, is this something that you can have on your body without it just annoying you or distracting you and leading to a safety issue instead of protecting you? Convincing the farmer using business arguments is really good because they're watching money go out the door as they're buying protective equipment, spending on fit testing. But thinking about safety as an investment goes a long way because safer workers have higher productivity. They're more profitable as a business. If everybody is not injured, they're coming to work, they're feeling good, they're doing what needs doing. Also, reducing those injuries and illnesses. Unfortunately, some people end up paying quite a bit for workers' comp and even just medical costs. If somebody has a health issue or has an injury, that can be pretty high. So, safety for every dollar you're spending, that money is a really good investment as long as you're investing it well. Most of you on the call are probably familiar with this hierarchy of controls, and this is just going in order. Like, what's going to give you the most bang for your buck? Can we get rid of the hazard? Well, you're probably not going to get rid of dairy cows if you're a farmer, but there are some farms that we've talked to where they say, you know what, we actually don't need fit testing anymore because we've switched to only products that don't require respiratory protection. You know what? If you can manage to do that, great. Or if you can substitute to something with a lower risk, if you can change how people are working and doing things like having an auto dispense for the foot bath chemicals so people aren't actually handling it themselves. And then if you really can't do anything else, you start putting people in protective equipment, but that requires them to know why they should be doing that, for them to believe that it's important to actually do that and to have what they need and communicate if they don't. So relying on people, that's your last line of defense. Putting a pair of goggles on, putting on gloves, they have to actually be invested in safety to have that happen consistently. So when I'm talking to workers especially, but even with the farmers, I'm explaining the issues so they get a sense of what we're talking about. Then I'll show them, so like this is how the respirator works, this is what you should do with the inspection, and then we'll just repeat it. So that's a really good way to, they can hear the information, or maybe they have hearing loss and they can't, but they're also getting involved in the process and putting their hands on something. Um, I recently was at a greenhouse conference where they had a session, teach your people how to water. And I'm thinking, wow, I didn't realize that was an issue. That seems like a really basic, but it's just like on a dairy farm, teach your people how to milk the cows. Well, you can slap a machine on an udder, but cleaning, stimulating, doing force stripping, and all the things properly to produce clean, quality milk, that's a little bit more complicated. So in the watering talk, they actually had a whole bunch of things that I hadn't even considered. So it seems like something basic, but you really do need to break it down, tell them why it's important, do a demonstration, and then have them teach it back to you. If they're not quite getting it right, then focus on what they did do right and then adjust as needed. So I use a lot of flip charts, and this is a good way to share information if you are in a small space. Sometimes there is just no room for a projector and a screen, and you don't need electricity. You've usually got notes on the back of the flip chart, so they're looking at a picture or a few words, and then you have kind of the bullet points on the back. So this flip chart here is for the worker protection standard training. So it has everything to comply with that regulation, but it's just images. And then on the back side, it has kind of a script to follow. When I am in the middle of the field, or if there's a smaller group, or if I just want to have visuals, if I'm doing an equipment training where I'm outside and I just want to show like a PTO or show hydraulics or something like that, if I have the equipment right next to me, I can do that, but sometimes that's not possible. Or if it's a shop meeting, I can show a picture of the thing that I'm talking about. So flip charts are a great way. Having printed off large poster size, it gets people talking and it gives them kind of an idea of what you mean. Having real equipment is super. So what you're looking at is a Tyvek suit full of newspaper, and we hitch it to a PTO, and it is a very visual, impactful demonstration. We also have the workers help clean up the newspaper after everything's shut off and stopped, so they will remember that. So having that entanglement demo, having that visual, a lot of people record it on their phone or take pictures. But having that hands-on, getting people up out of their seats, especially for those mid-afternoon trainings where people might be low energy, it just gets them to participate more. Photonovellas or comic books are a pretty commonly used health education or safety education material. So these are designed to be eye-catching, colorful, bilingual, illustrated storylines where it talks about a concept. So the one on the screen that you're seeing is a Spanish stress management for dairy workers comic that we designed recently. We have other ones on ergonomics and on Dairy 101, what are the hazards? Welcome to the farm. There's one for field workers. I've seen them for blood pressure and diabetes management, just all sorts of illustrated comic book style for people that might not read very well. People who have a learning disability might not know that they do. People who can't see and don't have reading glasses might have a harder time, but this format kind of lets them follow along with the story, even if they can't read every single word. So, doing ergonomics education for the farm community has been interesting. I usually just start off and hopefully it gets people to laugh. What hurts? Where does it hurt? Why do you think that is? And everybody's got something, right? So even these workers in their 20s or 40s, they have like a shoulder, or a back, or something's just tweaked a little bit by the end of the season. Some of these younger workers say, like, nope, nothing hurts. I feel great. I don't know if I believe that, but if so, good for you. Most of us have something stiff or sore when we're doing repetitive work like that. So in agriculture, again, there's a lot of uncomfortable stuff that needs to get done over and over and over again. Lots of hand movement, lots of wrist cutting, using tools, pruning, picking up and moving heavy things where you might not be able to use a forklift or a cart, you might actually have to move it by hand. So, kind of natural to assume that something's going to hurt when you're doing that type of physically demanding job. When I talk to workers in the training, I like to go over what some of these common problems are. So, like, oh, who's heard of epicondylitis, tennis elbow? Not many people, but okay, well, here's an example. So, how are you moving that part of your body? What tendonitis can do to the wrists? Carpal tunnel, people may have heard of. But then we talk about things like whole body vibration. If you have this shaking where your whole body is just kind of getting every little bump in the driveway while you're on equipment, and then also hand-arm vibration if somebody's using chainsaws doing that type of work. So I do like to talk about what these things are, but not focusing on the definition, more focusing on what are some types of work tasks that might lead to this, and then what are the warning signs? So what might you notice if you have white fingers, if you're having tingling, swelling, burning, numbness, whatever. And then how do we prevent that? So some of those things like stretching and warming up and how you're using your body, just like any other tool that you're using, you need to think about the proper way. I do include some information about tool selection just to give people an idea of what to consider. And I also have people just like put up your hands. Okay. Does everybody have hands that are the same size? What size gloves do you wear? Well, of course, you're not going to use the same size tool. Something that's comfortable for your hand might not be for the person next to you. So that idea kind of reinforces the concept. We've done a lot where I work with educating people about respiratory hazards, respiratory protection, complying with the requirements of the worker protection standard for pesticide applicators, but also just fit testing dairy workers who are using these foot bath chemicals. So we do clinics throughout the spring in different areas around New York State. We get hundreds of workers helped, and some of them are farm owners, some of them are seasonal workers coming in who do pesticide work. And then I go right to dairy farms because it's so hard with their scheduling to do something like go off the farm to a clinic. So, what do people need to know? Well, why do I have to put this thing on my face when I'm working? What am I doing? Like, how long am I going to wear it? What tasks do I need it for? What will it protect me from? And what won't it protect me from? So obviously something like an N95 that can't help you with every single respiratory hazard that you might encounter in agriculture. Also, how to take care of your equipment so it stays in good working order, putting it on, adjusting it, making sure, especially with new workers, that it's worn correctly. It needs to be tight enough. Also doing the seal checks and making sure that it's properly adjusted every time you wear it because it's just like buttoning a shirt wrong. You know it fits you. You've done your fit test, but today you buttoned it in a hurry. You're not wearing it correctly. So going through all these things with the workers is really key. I start off with the when and why you should wear it and what are the limitations. And we also get a lot of questions from workers. They're like, well, I have these cartridges. You told me how they work. How often should I be changing them? What schedule should I keep in mind? And then with the fit testing, especially, it's good to have small groups. Last week, I was at a dairy with two workers, and that was enough to handle because one worker ended up detecting the solution. We were doing qualitative fit testing and he was having some issues and was a new user. So I had to adjust. So if you've got like a group of 10 people in front of you, it's going to slow things down. It's better to have just a few or have multiple people on hand to do that. And then hands-on activities. I have people get out their respirator. Don't put it on yet, just have it in your hand. We're going to go through what you need to look at for your inspection to make sure it's ready to use. And then just doing things like putting it on and look at your neighbor to do the seal check because everybody has trouble finding that exhalation valve on the chin. You do have to have a variety of options, especially for fitting farm workers with respirators. There was a woman we tried to fit test for an N95 a number of years ago. It was just for nuisance dust, it wasn't for pesticides, but we couldn't find a single N95. Every one that we tried was too big, too small, just didn't quite work. She had a smaller nose, wider cheekbones, and she was also very short. So not everything is going to work for the person's face. Having a mix of things, we bring different respirators to the clinics, and we also have small, medium, large for all of them. But you really do want to take your time with people and especially underscore like, why are you wearing this? This will protect your lungs. This thing that you're doing at work is an exposure, and this respiratory protection will help you. We've created materials. So I had mentioned inspection. We want people to look at their equipment every time they're going to wear it. Just do you see everything that needs to be on there? I have taken brand new respiratory protection out of the box and it's been missing valves. So even when it's not something that a worker's been using, but I do also run into people who have borrowed or inherited a respirator from someone who's no longer at the farm, which they might not know anything about that respirator, just ended up wearing it because they were told, oh, yeah, you're doing foot baths now. So the supervisor's not aware, the farm owner's not aware, and they're like, can you please come fit test this person? Because they have not been trained and they just have this respirator and I don't know where it came from. So we do want people to get off to a good start. Some people are very experienced respirator users. They have decades of having worn this. But for the new people, we really do take our time. And if there's someone experienced, they can be showing the new people. So it reinforces their learning, and we make sure the new people get all the information they need. So donning, talking them through it, because a lot of people crisscross straps for things like N95s. We might be fit testing at a fire department, and we have the first responders coming in and they've worn it before, but they're just doing a slingshot thing to put it on their face. We want to make sure the straps are properly placed. They should be holding it in their hand and then pulling the straps one at a time, making sure they're taking their time to seal check it. For those half-face respirators, we do also want to show people how to do the seal checks, how to adjust it properly when tightening the straps, and then also how to take care of the cartridges. So during the 5-minute comfort assessment, you have some time to work with. If you're fit testing people, they're sitting there anyway. You can start going through this information. Make sure they have everything and also just repeating yourself, all the information they need to know about their respirator. We do want people cleaning them because in the farm environment, you're sweating, you've got dust and who knows what else and pesticide residues. Most people are using these PPE cleaning pads. I do make it clear for dairy workers, they should not be using any of the towelettes that you would use for udders. So cleaning the respirator after use, making sure that it's stored dry. And then for things like N95s, if you can still breathe through it, it's not particularly dirty. You can wear it more than once. They are disposable, but they could be worn for 5 or 10 minutes at a time. So somebody could just put them in a brown paper bag and have them for another day. With the elastomeric respirators, sandwich bag is fine. Could also be those clear totes like you saw from the greenhouse. And we do try and have small groups for the farms. They need some help with the OSHA and worker protection standard compliance stuff. And there is a small entity compliance guide from OSHA that's been helpful, but they really do need to know like what to include in their program, even just talking through things like how the medical clearance works. Well, what's the difference between a fit test, medical clearance, seal checks? Like, what do I need to do? How do I do it? So just focus on the to-do list and explain why each step is needed. Training workers, just be very clear, use simple language, repeat things in different ways, show and tell using those visuals. So for our fit test clinics, we put those posters like the inspections and the cartoon handouts right up on the wall, and we have people follow along with their respirator. So just think about your audience and go slow. Make sure you're taking time with them so they have what they need. Ask them for their ideas too, because there might be something about the workplace that you're not considering, and they are absolutely experts in the job that they're doing all day. Take time to answer any questions that they have and clarify things like the cartridge change out, for example. What are their expectations? What do they think this will do? And then just celebrate, like, oh, you did a good job. You adjusted that properly. That looks like a really good fit for you. And then talk them through the fit testing. So I did want to leave everybody with a bunch of resources. The US Ag Centers, the Northeast Center is one of them. There's a YouTube channel where there's just a bunch of safety information. There's some videos in English and Spanish, and it's a really great resource. So check that out if you need any materials for training agricultural workers. There might be something on that YouTube. There's also an ergonomics comic book that was developed a number of years ago. There's some stretches for different agricultural tasks. It focuses on body positioning and injury prevention, and that is available in English and Spanish. There's this ergonomics guide for non-powered hand tools that I found when I was pulling together materials on tool selection, and it gets really into the nitty-gritty, but I've used some of that as examples to talk through with workers or farmers. AgriSafe is a great resource for online safety trainings and webinars. They have a lot of really good information, and they have a Pilates and yoga. So it's focused on women in agriculture, but anybody could use it. There's some good stretches. PERC, pesticideresources.org. If there's anything you need with worker protection standard or respiratory protection, they're a really good go-to. And then SAFE, SAIF, is a workman's comp company out of Oregon. They have really fun and funny, they have a good sense of humor, short safety videos. So there's a number of them on shop safety. They have some agriculture, some other industry, but SAFE has some really good resources available. I want to make folks aware because this is something that we've started running into. There are piratas. We have counterfeit N95s that are out there, and people might be getting them from the county. So, like, we've had EMS groups that they come in, they have their supposedly 3M N95, and I take a closer look at it, and guess what? It's a fake. So there is a handout online that gives a rundown of what to look for. Look for a letter of the alphabet before the lot number. Look for writing on the straps that shouldn't be there with these teal ones, the 1860s. We've found writing on the straps, and that shouldn't be there. But you do want to take a close look and make sure that people are using NIOSH approved respiratory protection. There's still some people that get KN95s or the emergency use authorization type stuff. It's out there, but if somebody has like a single strap respirator or they have one of these other products, it is not quite the same guarantee of protection. So understanding why there's this information on the box, what it means to be NIOSH approved, that's another thing to talk to the farmer about. NIOSH has this fun beard chart. We also print this off. So this is at all of our fit test clinics. We have it up on the wall. People get a kick out of looking at it because there's funny names for all the beards. They do have English and Spanish. And basically just anywhere where the seal of that respirator is, we know that anything like facial hair, even stubble, if I can see it, it's going to affect how that respirator fits. It won't seal. And then all those teeny tiny particles are going right into your lungs. So we have some people show up with really funky tan lines. They might have long sideburns. They might have a very precise mustache, but as long as they pass based on the beard chart, or even if they hold the respirator to their face so they can shave what's needed, we just make sure that they're okay when they come in. Okay. There's a respirator selection guide that's great. This comes from AgriSafe, and it just talks through cartridges and 95, some options for people to look at. I don't know very many people who have gone to the powered air purifying respirators, but there are a few farms that have. That's an investment for sure, but there's some really good success because you have this on, it's not tight fitting, it's blowing air, and you've got your fanny pack thing on, but not a whole lot of farms are going to be willing to make that investment. They might not be able to. All right. Next, we have NICAM, or the Northeast Center, I guess. NICAM is the New York Center for Ag Medicine and Health. That's usually what I say I'm working for because most of our programs are based in New York. We get funding from different sources, but outside of New York, we're more known as the Northeast Center because we cover from Maine to West Virginia. So outside of New York, I'm happy to do Zoom trainings. I've been doing webinars and talks for groups of workers on different safety and health topics and comic books and posters. You can go right to our website and find a lot of these resources that I've mentioned. They are PDFs and you can print them yourself. Most of everything that we have is English and Spanish. There's a few resources that might be English only at this point, but we do try and make everything available bilingual. And then the last thing I want to do is plug this life skills series in January, a collaboration between Cornell University, FarmNet, the small farms and ag workforce development programs at Cornell, but also NICAM. There's going to be a different topic of the month, things like nutrition, personal finance, communication, stress management. And every month, a short video will be sent out, and then there will be a live Zoom session, question and answer, and let people talk about that topic. So that will be starting in January. If you want information, there's some on the screen. But I think I have talked enough. Let's see if there's any questions in the chat. And thank you all again for having me. So yes, I can make sure that the presentation slides get sent out to everyone.
Oh,
And
great.
go
Thank you.
ahead, Michelle.
Yeah, if you're willing to share your presentation slides, well,
Sure.
and actually, first off, thank you so much for an amazing presentation. Really excellent. And for to those in our audience, if you're interested in getting a copy of the slides and the resources, please email coehce@berkeley.edu. And that way we can make sure that you get access to these incredibly valuable resources that have been compiled here for you by Anna. So thank you so much, Anna. That is amazing. And I'll put the email in the chat for everyone as well. Um,
Right.
great.
So to sum it up, I just would like to say the ag community is amazing. They do really hard work. They have a lot going on the farm, and they're really dedicated and passionate about what they do. So a good way to start is like, hey, show me around your farm. Tell me about what you do. Just get them talking, and pretty much anytime I've had an interaction with a farmer, it's been really positive. As long as you're just coming into it, willing to learn, ask all these questions that you have if you're not familiar. They're an expert in what they do, you're an expert in what you do. But if you're focusing on helping them and getting to understand their needs, that really does go a long way. And also snacks, always snacks.
Always snacks. I love it. Well, and one of the things I really appreciate about your presentation, I think a lot of the principles, yes, this presentation is tailored to the agricultural community, but I think so many of the principles that you shared that you practice in your training are applicable across the spectrum, no matter what sector, no matter what industry you are. There were so many gems of just very great ideas, principles, practices that could be applied for anyone who is responsible for health and safety training. For example, I love the jelly donuts analogy for
Mhm.
putting pressure on your back. That's so smart. So I just encourage the audience to think about what types of metaphors you might be able to make in using everyday objects, things to kind of make that connection with your audience. It was really great. We do have some questions. One of the first questions, you mentioned the importance of gaining farmers' support to build trust and access to workers. You also emphasized the value of safety training and explained that investing in safety pays off in the long run. How do you present this message to farmers, and what kind of reactions do you typically get?
I have the advantage of only going where I'm invited. So I would say great because the people who are like absolutely opposed to anybody visiting their farm probably are not going to call me up and say, hey, talk to my workers. I think there is a really good attitude in New York with the interactions that I've seen, and also the fact that there is a workforce development program that Cornell has created. There's bilingual trainings, there's like supervisor trainings, English for agricultural workers. There's so much out there that's focused on taking care of your workers, health and wellness, safety, communicating even HR, where years and years ago when I started with this work, that was not the case. So I think everybody's focused on what does my co-op say I need to do? What do my markets say about what the farm environment's like for my workers? They really are trying to do a good job. And I think the attitude's been very positive as long as you're a person who's helping. So anybody who does training, it might be a vet, it might be a consultant, they might have a relationship, there might be a fee. I can go out for free with the funding that we have, but there's a lot of interest in this type of work because consumers are demanding it too. So the farmer wants their workers to be safe. The market is requiring these types of trainings to happen, and I think that is a good thing.
Amazing. Thank you. You shared so many different exposures that I hadn't really considered, like silo gas exposures, farmer's lung. I'm curious, do you find that a lot of the farms you work with have kind of centralized operations with like a primary or a few primary hazards, or do you tend to work with a lot of smaller farms that might have very diverse operations with lots of different hazards? Is it really farm dependent? Kind of curious about the landscape.
It is kind of farm dependent. I do work with some smaller producers, but a lot of times the farms I go to are large enough to have Spanish speaking employees. There's diversification, right? Dairy farms are getting bigger. They have people who are doing crop work, people who are doing animal work. So there are both of those like foot bath chemicals and then might be pesticide related exposures, grain dust, other things like that. So it does end up being more of a mix. It's not just one thing. And then there's that dust. I have parked a white minivan at a farm and I come back 2 hours later and it is beige. There's just debris from bedding. There's things blowing around with all the fans running in summertime and things like shavings for bedding. It just all kind of comes together to make a mix of hazards.
Thank you. Actually, speaking of dust, this kind of ties to a comment and question about from one of our audience members. They recently presented on respirable crystalline silica dust from harvesting and planting operations, and noticed that silica is found in some soil and crops like cotton, rice, sugar, grains, and related operations, and other mechanical equipment used on farms. Is that something that you've encountered in your work? And then also an invitation to connect to further expand and share those resources.
There's a few folks who have been working with people who are farmers who are also cutting bluestone because there's this region in Delaware County in New York and it's beautiful. They just have some land out back and they're cutting bluestone and they might not be wet cutting. They might not wear an N95. So we're trying to promote that with clinicians and also with workers to educate them about the hazards because silica is some pretty nasty stuff.
Thank you so much. And also another question, kind of looking at train the trainer type programs. What institutional arrangements, personnel, resources, and perhaps even kinds of luck might you need to develop train the trainer programming, where longtime agricultural workers could also help to deliver some of the training sessions?
There are some things like that that exist already. I think it just takes a couple of people who are excited about it and follow up to get started. And then if it's catching on, it'll just wildly expand before you even know it. So, Migrant Clinicians Network and the Upper Midwest Center, UMash, had developed some dairy worker training, and it's meant to be a train the trainer. So they have just kind of basic overviews of different hazards. That's one example, Seguridad en las Lecherías. And then there's some other programs that have been developed, but it really just does take a few people who care about the topic. It doesn't need to be expensive or involved, but just getting the workers on board because they are the experts. If you have a supervisor at a farm, our comic books are designed to be used for orientation. So if I give that to a supervisor, explain what the purpose is, then they can kind of like, okay, day one, I want to talk about cows. I want to talk about emergency contact info, all of those things. And it's pretty open-ended, so they can add in additional information or skip things that aren't relevant. Unfortunately, I see the comment about other languages. We do not have resources in other languages at this time because most of what we encounter is English and Spanish. I know the National Center for Farm Worker Health has done a lot with indigenous languages like Guatemalan and Mexican languages. So they have a lot of multilingual resources. But yeah, we just don't have a Punjabi population in New York. So we usually stick to English and Spanish.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Um, we are just about reaching time with our presentation today. Oh, and then I we also it looks like Cal DPR does have some other languages, so that might be a resource for folks for the UCCE Fresno Small Farms program. Um, In closing, I guess I just want to ask, is there any, if you had to summarize kind of the most important thing in your perspective when delivering this kind of training to people who are interested in providing health and safety training, what would you say if you had one takeaway that you want everyone to make sure that they think about moving forward, what would it be?
Consider your audience. So New York agriculture, like we don't have valley fever, we don't have these other things to worry about, but we do have some pretty unique terrain and exposures. Just ask questions like what commodity, the age of the person, what language they prefer, how they want to receive the information. You can't assume anything because ag is so diverse. So I just put in the chat, Migrant Clinicians Network has worked with the same illustrator, Salvador Saenz. There are a lot of comic books that he's done that are on the Migrant Clinician website. So if people do need English and Spanish, there's a lot of really good comics on there.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And thank you for your work. Thank you for your presentation today. I know that I saw some beautiful gems in there that I'll consider in future training opportunities, whether it's to agriculture or just general worker health and safety. So just want to reiterate how much we appreciate your time and expertise today.
Well, thank you for having me. I think it's pretty clear that I enjoy what I do, and I really love working with the farm community. It's been very rewarding, especially since I am a farm kid. I grew up in dairy, and now I get to help workers and producers to be more successful and to get home in one piece. And yes, the
Absolutely.
Western Center is a wonderful resource. So they're one of our sister centers, and a lot of the information that I shared, and I'll make sure everyone gets a PDF of the slides. They do have some good things about valley fever and heat illness and tons of other materials.
Oh, great. Well, thank you again so much. Thank you to everyone who joined us today. As a reminder, you'll get a link via email to our evaluation form. Once you completed that evaluation form, you'll be able to access and print your certificate of completion. Be sure to check out the website for more information about other upcoming trainings. And again, you can email coehce@berkeley.edu if you'd like a copy of the presentation slides so that you can dig into all of those abundant, wonderful resources that Anna shared. So thank you again so much for being here today, Anna. Take
All
care.
right. Thank you all so much. Have a good rest of your day.
Bye-bye.